A Little More Modern Persuasion by Sarah Marks. 21st Century Austen 1.5. A short story collection. When I ended Emma and Frederick's story in August 2014, I thought I was done with their story. That didn't change until I was waiting the year between getting a contract with a publisher and the final release date. I was writing other things, but Emma's voice kept creeping back into my head. I think it was because I had spent much of that year writing the character profiles on my blog. It started with Mary and moved on from there. This small collection of short stories were born from these internal conversations I had with Emma. Some have already been shared, but others are new. Now, in 2022, I'm putting out the second edition. More than half the books in this series have been released. 3 other short story collections have been as well. Stories were written for anthologies. A new edition of Modern Persuasion was released with additional content. I wanted to re-release this collection to include all the additions to Emma and Frederick's part of my universe. If you haven't read Modern Persuasion already, I highly suggest you do so first. Seriously, please read it. These stories assume you already know these characters. First, you can read Mary versus the Anti-Feminist. It was inspired by something that happened to me at the conference that inspired PubCon, Book Expo. Mary's interaction is a bit different than mine, but it was fun to play with ideas of how a woman who stays at home with her children and identifies as a feminist understands her choice. It gave me a new appreciation for Mary. Second, you can read Emma's Hour. This started as 2 stories that came to me in O'Hare Airport a few weeks before Modern Persuasion's release. I don't really care that much for O'Hare Airport. I find it to be a pit of hell with a few saving graces, yummy popcorn and very clean bathrooms. I had to deal with a long delay between flights home and was stuck entertaining myself for 2 hours. I started to wonder about Emma and the time she spent in O'Hare after breaking up with Frederick and after Louisa's accident. I polled readers about which story they would like to read, and it was a pretty even vote. I sat down and wrote both only to discover they were very similar hours, but with different company. Third, you can read 2 years later. This story I wrote in New York a few days after Modern Persuasion was released. I was there for Book Expo, and it had been 2 years since I had been there and 3 years since the conference had inspired Modern Persuasion. I walked around the conference with Emma in my head telling me what was different now. Not just what was different for me, but what would be different for her. A lot of my conversations with other authors made their way into that story. Things I found amusing or eye-roll-inducing. Fourth, you can read What If. The decision to follow Austen's outline for Modern Persuasion pretty much dictated the direction of the story. That didn't stop me from playing my favorite writing game, What If. This is when I imagine other ways a story could have been resolved. With Modern Persuasion, the drama revolves around the simple fact that Emma and Frederick don't talk to each other. What if Frederick was able to get over his anger while they were in New York? It turned out there was a different story there. This is where the book changes. The character profiles that were intended to pad the book have been removed and 2 new stories have been added. From A Little More Woodhouse Hall, Sally's best life is about one of the characters in that book as she applies to be a cover designer at Emma's publishing company. After that is 150 pounds lifted from A Little More Northanger Parks. This is a story that lets us see what happens to Bella and Lucas, the villains from that book when Karen becomes Bella's mentor and boss. Clearly I still write stories about these characters, and in a few years I'll update it again with even more stories. Sarah.
Frederick hits send. by Sarah Marks. 21st Century Austen. A prequel story. I hate moving. In college, it had been easy with just a few random boxes and duffel bags of clothes to carry. It had been between different dorms and temporary apartments for the first few years. Everything had been furnished. Eventually, I was lucky to find a roommate who provided all the supplies I would ever need. Emma. After college, I shifted into annual moves and increasing items. Once upon a time, I was able to bribe my friends with pizza and beer if they carried up a couple of boxes. Now they all laughed and told me to stop being cheap and hire movers. I had hired the movers for this move, but Patrick and Vic helped with smaller items. After a few boxes, Pat ended up on a couch, a heating pad, and an ice pack in rotation after straining some muscle. At least the movers were in and out within an hour, and there was an elevator to make it easier to get up to the 5th floor. I left my friends in the apartment to relax while I got 2 pizzas, a case of beer, and a couple joints. The kitchen was completely unpacked when I returned, and boxes were broken down. Patrick was still on the couch but had managed to sit up, the heating pad still behind him, pulling items out of the boxes and handing them to Vic to put in the right place. "Good man," Patrick said when he saw what I had returned with and put his hand so I could insert a bottle of beer. "I found the muscle relaxers," Vic said from the floor as he opened another box. I knew that meant the bathroom had been unpacked and organized. That was the only way they could have found the small bottle of pain relievers that Patrick rattled as I put the food on the coffee table in the den. I imagined Patrick holding out his hands and grabbing at air until the bottle was in his hands. "I'm hungry, Frederick." Patrick called, "Bring me pizza." It wasn't long before we relaxed and unpacked. Patrick eventually slid to the ground as the muscle relaxers kicked in. "Babe," Vic said to Patrick when the first joint came out. "Should you?" Patrick shrugged as he put it in his mouth. Frederick didn't feel guilty about helping his friend indulge. "What's this box?" Pat asked, pointing a foot toward the most beat-up box in a stack. My stomach clenched as I looked at the old, beat-up box that didn't match the mover's other pristine ones. "Chicago," I said, trying to give a casual shrug. In truth, it was everything left from Chicago and Emma. I didn't even remember what I had put in there nearly 8 years ago when I had moved home, rejected and depressed. Vic and Patrick exchanged a look but didn't press. "Do you need a rebound from Abby?" Vic asked, changing the topic as he took the top off another beer. Only these two were allowed to avoid the conversation about one ex-girlfriend by bringing up the latest ex. I didn't want to talk about either Abby or Emma, but Abby was easier to talk about if I had to pick. "No rebound," I said, picking up the plates and taking them into the kitchen. Being alone in the kitchen allowed me to take a deep breath and brace myself for the conversation. When I walked back into the den, I was ready to talk about Abby. Vic took a seat on the couch next to his husband and adjusted the heating pad. I sat down in a well-worn armchair. Abby had hated this chair, but it was something I had all my life, except for the years in Chicago. "We can set you up with someone," Patrick said as he fiddled with the heating pad settings. "Or you can do another charity date." I let out a bark of a laugh. "The charity date you had me do last month was a complete disaster. I don't think I need to repeat it or subject another fan to what I'm really like." The charity date plans had been made well before I had broken up with Abby. It had been a prominent national fundraiser, and I was surprised at how popular the date with me had been. The poor woman who won arrived days after Abby and I broke up. She had to spend the day at the studio while I worked and then took out for the worst dinner of my life. I knew better than to drink so much at dinner, but I was not listening to that voice. I got so drunk that I couldn't drive home and my first was kind enough to get me a ride. I sent her a very lovely apology gift. The next day, when I woke up with a nasty hangover, I decided to never subject another fan to something like that again. "She still thinks you're wonderful," Patrick said and laid his head on Vic's shoulder. "Well, at least one woman does," I said as he stretched his legs out and leaned back. "Abby doesn't hate you," Patrick said with a shrug. "She's trying to force your hand. She loves you and wants you to give in and move to New York." I gave a slight nod. I knew precisely what Abby was trying to do. Her career and family were in New York City. She wanted to be there, but I had told her many times before we started dating that I would never move to New York. Now I repeated what I had told Abby during our last fight. If I wouldn't move out there for Emma, why would I move out for her? So, Patrick said slowly, drawing out the word. That means Emma came up in those final fights. I scratched my head as I realized I hadn't shared these details with them yet. This had been building up for months. Abby told me she's selling the house, and I could either buy it or move out. That's not what I asked, Patrick said and fluidly sat up before leaning forward and putting his elbows on his knees. I raised an eyebrow. So much for the injured back. Oh, fuck off, Patrick said with a smirk when he realized I was onto him. You're avoiding the topic. Don't start keeping secrets from me after over 20 years of friendship. Fine, I said and leaned my head back. She wondered what my objection was to living in New York. Abby feels I'm refusing to grow up because I don't want to deal with opportunities on the East Coast. She's not wrong, Patrick said and dropped his head. What opportunities? Vic added as he adjusted his position. Patrick shrugged. I have no idea. This is Los Angeles. Television shows and movies all start here. She's not wrong that you're refusing to grow up. Would you have moved for Emma? Vic asked in a low voice. If she had asked, I mean? This was not the first time a partner had told me I was refusing to grow up because of Emma. Even my parents said it occasionally. I was often reminded that, at 30, most of my friends owned homes or were in committed relationships. Some even had children. I'm sure Emma's moved on and is practically running that publishing company, I said, lifting my head to meet Patrick's eyes. She's probably married, has a baby or two, and has her family doing exactly what she wants. Emma Shaw was a sticky subject between the two of us. I had told Patrick everything about how things ended with Emma. He maintained, to this day, that my mistake had been returning to Los Angeles brokenhearted and writing a movie that dragged Emma to make me feel better. It had been my fantasy version of the breakup, but it had been a surprise hit when released. I was sure nobody would know it was about Emma. Patrick, on the other hand, though I should have reached out to Emma as soon as I got home to tell her how much I missed her. He felt I could have done more to keep Emma in my life if I truly loved her. Have you ever looked her up? Patrick asked. I shook my head. I don't want to know. What's your plan then? Vic asked as he got up and helped Patrick to his feet. This was the sign that they were ready to go home. I wasn't sure if Vic's question was about Abby, Emma, or unpacking. Honestly, I had no plan for any of it. Every time I make a plan, it seems to blow up in my face. I often just react to the world. Maybe one easy way to grow up was to create some type of plan, but I should start with something simple. I got to my feet to let them out. I guess I'll start with unpacking and getting settled. With the bathroom and kitchen already unpacked, it was easy to finish the rest of the apartment that night. I put the television on in the background as I put books away on shelves and unpacked my clothes. I needed more furniture to make the apartment comfortable, but I wasn't worried about finding that. After a few hours, there was only one box left. It had been 8 years since I had taped it up and put it out of sight. Each time I moved, it came with me and always ended up on the top shelf of a closet. This time when I picked it up, the bottom fell out. The tape had cracked and stopped holding the box together. The pile of things fell out was topped off by a collection of personally burnt CDs. I knelt down to see these items for the first time in nearly a decade. The CDs were primarily mixes Emma and I had made for road trips. A few were backups from my computer, and others were bootlegs of live concerts I had attended. I didn't have a CD player to listen to anymore, but I took them into the den, trying to think of someone who did have one I could borrow. I got distracted looking at the CDs with Emma's decorative handwriting on them in different color Sharpies. I remembered the cup of multicolored Sharpies she kept at her desk in a repurposed free mug from some campus event. The bottom was dotted with various colors from uncapped markers as she wrote song titles on the CDs in small letters. Reading them brought us back to the moment each song had been important to us. I hadn't listened to most of them since I returned to Los Angeles. I wasn't sure if that was because I was avoiding them or my taste had changed. There was a pile of shirts at the bottom. Most were university shirts that we had purchased or been given. They were wrapped around picture frames. They had probably broken a few moments ago, so I opened them all, created a small glass pile, and cleaned it up before I looked at the last item. I shook the shirt out after pulling out the broken frames and glass scattered on the floor as I caught a whiff of Emma's perfume. I was avoiding it, but when I came back from tossing the shirts in my laundry and putting the pictures on my desk, it was the only thing sitting there. It was my manuscript, which I had written my senior year in high school and asked Emma to edit as a way to bond with her. The manuscript was in a plastic protective sleeve to keep it together. The elastic holding it close had snapped and crumbled when I picked it up. Inside was a USB drive and a printed version of the book with a massive binder clip keeping all the pages secure. I took it into my room and loaded up the flash drive as I flipped through the manuscript. The tracked comments were printed on the margins, and Emma's small script in red with more notes after discussing the book. It was easier to read the notes on the computer. I couldn't remember why I had printed it or why Emma had added more comments. I had never made the edits she had suggested. I stayed up late into the night reading through the manuscript. When finally crashed, my final thought was to submit this book to be published. "You want to do what?" Patrick asked the following day at a cafe. I had called Patrick as soon as I woke up the following morning with a plan in mind. "I want to publish my book. I've made the edits, and I need your help finding an agent," I said and tapped the manuscript and flash drive. I had woken up and saved the changes I had made to the book, preserving the version Emma had created. I wasn't ready to delete that one yet, but I wasn't sure why. I had purchased a new protective sleeve to keep it all in and printed a copy of the new draft, which was bigger now. I wanted Patrick to read it and knew he would want to hold the book. "What makes you think I know agents who can do this?" Patrick said as he leaned back in the wooden chair and crossed one long leg over the other. I raised an eyebrow. "If you don't know them, you know someone who does." A wide smile spread across my friend's face. "What am I looking for?" I had made a list with my search criteria and passed it to him. "Primarily, I am an agent who had connections with one specific publisher and could sell a book written for middle school boys." Patrick looked down at the paper with a sharp inhale. "This is the company Emma works for, isn't it?" That idea had come to me as I woke up. I wanted Emma to want to edit this book, and then I wanted to refuse her. I was confident that this was the catharsis I needed. If I could make her feel rejected, we would have come full circle. I was confident that I could move on with my life and grow up. I couldn't tell Patrick all of this. He would hate my plan. "Emma is the best editor for this," I said, completely comfortable lying to him. Her profile on the publisher's webpage made clear that this was not the type of book she worked on. As soon as she saw the manuscript, I was confident that she would make an offer. "Find the right agent for this, Patrick," I said, leaning forward with my elbows on the table. "I need her to see it." "So?" Patrick asked a month later. We were back at the same cafe, but David, my book agent, was with us this time. David was slick with dark hair, gelled back, and wearing a fitted suit. He was projecting an image that didn't fit the man he was. When we first met, I thought he would be slick and manipulative. He was a gamer geek who wanted more young boys to love reading. "I did what you asked, man," he said and slumped. "They want the book but not the editor you're asking for." I scrunched my eyebrows together. "What?" David took a deep breath. "The editor you wanted, Emma, she passed on it without comment. I heard from an editor I know well, and she knows this market and age group better than Emma. I suggest you work with her." I blinked rapidly. She had passed on it without commenting? I had made sure David sent the draft with Emma's edits on it so she would understand what I wanted. I had watched him attach it and hit send. This seemed wrong. I tried to focus on David again because he was still talking. A very strong offer for one book with a plan for a month-long book tour around the country. It would start at the big publishing conference in New York City where they want you to participate with signings and readings for other people in the industry, David said, not realizing I had zoned out for a few seconds. "Why would they offer that much for one book?" Patrick asked, his eyes narrowing. David chuckled. "They think there's room for a series," he said and turned to talk to me. "You haven't offered more than one book, but I think they're hoping to make you feel good so you'll want to write more and so that you'll continue to publish with them. But I want Emma to work on this book, not Christy," I said and crossed my arms over my chest. I felt like a toddler, but my entire fantasy relied on me rejecting Emma, not her rejecting me again. Frederick, Patrick said as he rolled his eyes. She's not going to do it. Maybe you'll see her at that conference. David perked up. You would absolutely see Emma at PubCon if you accept this offer. I can assure you, no other publisher is going to offer this contract for only one book. This is a hot market, especially if your book will sell to parents and kids, but they like a series, so they keep the readers buying. I sat there and weighed my options. I didn't need the money, and I wasn't sure I wanted to write a series, but I was enticed by the chance to see Emma again and could re-strategize my plan. I need to think about it, I said. I appreciate that you're taking some time to talk with me, Christy said over the video feed. It was a few days since my conversation with David. I had asked for a chance to talk with Christy to see who I would be working with. The video feed wasn't great, so it was difficult to see what she looked like, but she was perky. Before I signed the contract, I wanted to get a better idea of the publicity for this book. Can you help me understand what you have in mind? I asked, trying to let her focus on what I was interested in knowing. It will take us a year to get this out. We want to launch it next June since kids and parents will be looking for books. You would go on a multi-city tour over the month doing signings and events. You would spend most of your time in Los Angeles and New York, but we also thought you could spend some time in Chicago since you went to college there, Christy rapidly rattled off. These are standard release activities for an author who will have name recognition. I nodded, thinking about my new plan. The tour wasn't what I cared about, other than what would happen in New York. The key to my new plan was for Emma to see me and know what it would be like to have me in her city. She would also see that she was wrong to pass on my book. That was a critical part of my new fantasy. She needed to know she had lost a book that would be popular. Why will I be in New York for a while? I asked, hoping she would take the bait. You'll be here for the PubCon conference where the book can be showcased. Librarians and booksellers are going to want to talk to you and grab copies to read. Plus, you're not hearing this officially, she said, looking on either side of the screen. This is an industry conference, but people who love books want to attend because we give away free books. The organizer is going to allow the general public in for one day, and you're famous beyond books. They think you'll be a draw. Who comes to the conference, other than the public day? I asked, not fully processing what she said about the public being included. I was too focused on Emma. Oh, everyone! Don't worry, I'll be with you. All the editors go because it's a chance for us to talk to new authors and support those getting promoted, she said. You'll come back to New York after the rest of the tour to visit any additional bookstores and events that we scheduled after PubCon. Will I see any of your colleagues during that visit? I asked, hoping for a more intimate opportunity to see Emma. Christy shrugged. Probably not, and you may not even see me that much. I wrapped up the conversation, learning everything I needed to know to make a decision. I'll let you know my decision, I said before ending it. If you accept, just hit send on the contract. Christy said as she waved. Once I shut the laptop, I turned to Patrick, who was sitting in my apartment office. Do you want to embarrass Emma? He asked, drumming his fingers on his leg while leaning back in a chair. I shrugged. Want her to see what she refused, twice. All right then, he said and got to his feet. What are you going to do? I'm going to accept the offer. David's right that it's better than I'd get from other publishers, and I'll very likely get to see Emma. No other publisher will get me that opportunity. Then sign the contract and hit send. My friend said and moved to the door. I watched as he went to the kitchen to grab the champagne. I quickly signed the contract, scanned it, and hit send. It felt good, and I was grinning when Patrick brought the glasses into the room. We clinked them together before taking a sip. I don't think I've seen you this happy in years, he said after we finished. I let my shoulders relax. I feel happier. Are you happy that you'll see Emma in a year or that your book is getting published? I thought about it for a moment. Both, but I'm only seeing Emma, so I can refuse her. Sure, tell yourself that you're only seeing the love of your life so you can show her how good your life is, Patrick said with a scoff. I rolled my eyes, but after he left, I kept playing his words repeatedly in my head. At the time, I was confident he was simply being snarky since I wasn't doing what he wanted. A year later, when I walked with Christy through the expo floor at PubCon, Patrick's words were back in my head. As my editor opened the door to the publisher's staging area, I was hit with the smell of Emma's perfume, and I knew I was wrong about why I had done this. Hitting send and publishing this book was the best decision I had made in years, but for reasons I was now ready to admit.
Mary versus the anti-feminist. If you asked Mary Shaw Musgrove how big the exhibit floor at PubCon was, she would say 10 miles. In reality, you could stretch it to 1.5 miles if you walked up and down each aisle. If you asked Mary how many pounds of books she carried up and down those aisles, she would say 100 pounds. In reality, it was probably about 30, 15 on each shoulder. If you asked Mary how many dollars worth of books she had on each shoulder, she would tell you they are priceless. She would be right. It had been years since Mary had been to PubCon. The last time she came was before her father had retired as CEO of their publishing company. She had been too young to know the true value of attending PubCon. Now, for Mary, that value was hundreds of dollars worth of free books. She had children and wanted to make sure they were good readers and critical thinkers. She spent her morning picking up plenty of children's books for the boys and a few erotica books for herself. She even picked up a book about the Mets for Tommy. She was very impressed with herself, but Mary was typically very impressed with herself. Mary bought some warm nuts and a bottle of water. She had walked from one end of the exhibit floor to the other and needed a break before making her return trip. She sat at a stage where someone was speaking about using children's books to develop empathy. Mary only gave the speaker half her attention. The rest of her mind was focused on her snack and looking through the books in her bags. She pulled out two that she wasn't sure about, read the back, and put one on the seat next to her. Maybe someone else would like it. Once she was done with her snack, she put her bags over her shoulders and made her way back to the aisles of vendors and publishers. It was easy to ignore most of the vendors with their small booths. Most of them sat there and smiled at you. A few were busy talking to other people. On the outer edges of the exhibits were companies who made book displays, were international publishers, or were authors promoting their own book. Mary avoided making eye contact with those authors. She felt bad because she knew this was all they could afford. Mary just put her head down and looked at her phone until she was sure she was closer to the bigger publishers. You could always tell when you got to the bigger publishers. You could look up to the rafters and see their massive hanging signs with their logos and company name. The crowds got much heavier around them. The pathways got congested with people grabbing books and bags, dogging lines of people waiting for autographs, and people stopping to chat or wait. Mary had to put her phone away and tried her best to be courteous to other people. She bumped into her fair share of random people and was, in exchange, pushed around by other random strangers. She was glad not all the big publishers were in one spot. Mary got to the middle of the exhibit floor. She put her head down again as she passed the L. Ron Hubbard books. She didn't want to have anything to do with those books and pitied the people who had been brainwashed by them. Her goal was a publisher that has been placed in the middle of the aisle. She could see the mass of people in the booth, which was so big it took up both sides. She wove her way through the crowd, grabbing a few books here and there. They had put out new titles since she last walked through. She saw there was a young adult author signing autographs. The author, a woman younger than Mary, seemed excited and was chatting with the older woman standing in front of her with a book in hand. Mary assumed this was the start of the autographing session. By the time Mary exited the booth, 10 minutes later, she was breathing heavily, probably red in the face and battered. She made her way to the end of the aisle and turned the corner. The next aisle was less busy, unlike the previous one. Mary caught her breath and recovered. This aisle had smaller publishers, but important ones. Mary suspected these would be the future imprints of the larger publishers. They were publishing good books, had increasing distribution, were winning awards, and getting new readers every year. It was almost like the exhibit floor was some type of solar system. The major publishers were the suns, the smaller publishers were the planets orbiting them, and the services were the asteroid fields. Every so often, the suns would collide and create a megasun. Mary slowly walked through this aisle and a book cover caught her attention. On the cover was a sad-looking, pregnant woman. "Feminism is harming modern women," a young blonde woman said to Mary. "Excuse me?" Mary said, not sure she had heard correctly. "Modern women are being harmed by the feminist movement," the blonde said. "In what way?" "You should talk to Carol, the author. She has a lot to say about the feminist movement." Mary was curious and allowed the blonde to lead her over to an older woman. This woman, Carol, reminded Mary of her long-dead grandmother's. She had light blonde hair, a color that was clearly artificial and outdated. It was teased into a high dome and pulled back into a small tight bun. Mary got the impression this hairstyle hadn't changed since the 1960s. Carol wore a tight, forced smile. She sat at a bar-height table with a pile of books on her right and a black Sharpie in her hand. The books wore the cover that had caught Mary's eye. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Carol asked. "Oh, I don't need a copy of the book." "The cover is very intriguing. You have a talented designer," Mary said. "I was telling Mary about how feminism is harming modern women," the blonde told Carol. "Ah, yes, women like Mary are being harmed by an outdated movement." "How so?" Mary asked. "I consider myself a feminist, but don't believe it has done any harm." "Let me guess," Carol said. "You are trying to balance both a job and your family. You don't feel like you can stay at home with your children. You feel like you would be betraying your fellow feminists." "No," Mary said with a shake of her head. Carol raised an eyebrow. "I have 2 young boys and decided to stay at home with them instead of working," Mary continued. "Really, I bet your fellow feminists give you a hard time about that choice," Carol said with a sly smile. Mary thought about it for a few moments, bit her lip as she did, and then shook her head again. "My mother was a feminist before she died. Her best friend is a feminist and one of my role models. My mother-in-law is a feminist and one of my older sisters is a feminist. They all took different paths and have never criticized my decision to stay at home." Carol and the blonde didn't have a response. "Actually, many of my friends identify as feminists and have all decided on different paths. I have never heard any of them judge the others for their choice," Mary said. "You're the lucky one. Most women your age feel the pressure to not choose taking care of their family," Carol said. "Feminism is toxic because it doesn't allow women to have a choice. They are expected to both care for a family and work outside the home." Carol and the blonde both had self-satisfied looks. "I think you have misidentified the problem. This isn't feminism's fault," Mary said. "Excuse me?" Carol said. "No, our society, as a whole, forces women to work outside the home and take care of the family for other reasons. Most families need the 2 incomes from both spouses just to make ends meet. It's not even to afford the luxuries, it's to afford the basics. This has its roots in a variety of causes, but those causes aren't feminism. Then women are still expected to take care of their homes as if they worked there full-time. I suspect some of that has to do with men's struggle to redefine their own roles in their families. I know my father and father-in-law would never have been able to imagine a more active role in their families. My own husband is far more active in taking care of our home, our sons, and me than either of our fathers were. Carol looked at Mary. It's how women are expected to be when they are labeled feminist. It's very damaging, Carol said. Mary narrowed her eyes. It's a word, Mary said. It has a specific meaning, so we need a new word, the blonde said. Its meaning can change. The feminist movement has changed since the start of the 20th century, Mary said. They called it the suffragette movement and then it became the feminist movement. They gave it a new word, the blonde said. Mary turned to the blonde woman and tilted her head to the side. Do you know what the word suffrage means? The blonde and Carol looked at each other. Ah, no, the blonde said. It is not a word that is limited to the women. It's word used to describe people's right to vote. There have been many suffrage movements over the past couple of centuries. Women had a good reason to stop using the word suffragette when they got the right to vote, but wanted freedom in society. What else should they have called themselves? Lady Freedom Team. It too would have been villainized by its opponents. Carol cleared her throat. So, you believe you're not under pressure to be a specific type of woman? Carol asked. I believe my wealth and class gives me the privilege to choose to stay at home with my children. I wish all women were lucky enough to truly have the choice. It sounds like you've been brainwashed by the liberals, Carol said. Mary sighed. You know, I thought this was a mature conversation that wasn't rooted in partisan politics. I may not be right, but I was certainly willing to engage in a conversation despite your assumptions about me. Then you ruined it by bringing bias into it. I'm not actually a liberal, I'm an independent who leans libertarian. Good luck finding a new word that can replace feminism. I'm sure it won't take you long to turn that into a slur against women, Mary said and walked away. As Mary turned a corner, she didn't turn down the next aisle, but kept walking back to the private area where the publishers were meeting with people. Emma and Karen were working in that area. Mary opened the door and went into the room. She saw Karen sitting there typing something into her phone. Mary walked to her mother's best friend and dropped down into the other chair at the table. Did you have a nice walk around the exhibits, Mary? Karen asked without looking up from her phone. I picked up some books for Tommy and the boys, but I just had the most infuriating conversation with some anti-feminist bitch. Karen looked up and Mary took this as her cue to retell the story. What did you say her name was? Karen asked when Mary was done with her story. Carol something? Mary said. She was old and blonde. Karen sat there looking at Mary for a few moments. Was it Carol Schmidt? Maybe? Mary said. Karen just sat there staring at Mary. Mary, do you know who Carol Schmidt is? Mary pursed her lips in deep thought. Nope, should I? She asked. Mary, you just took on the most notorious anti-feminist in the world. You just argued with a woman the Republican Party uses to tear down everything feminists build. You did all of that and showed more maturity than a woman in her late 80s. Mary just shrugged. Your mother would have been so proud of you, Karen said. Emma's Hour at the Airport. May 2008. How do you kill an hour at the airport? How do you kill an hour at the airport when you can't call Freddie? How do you kill an hour at the airport when you can't call Freddie and the two people traveling with you don't want to talk to each other, let alone you? Why was Karen traveling with my father? Was he that helpless that my mother's best friend has taken over running his life? I can see why my mother loved them both so much, they are quite similar. They haven't spoken to each other, but both sat down at the gate, opened their bags, pulled out manuscripts, pulled out the same brand of red pen, and started editing. Every so often one would use his or her red pen to make a mark on the page. I am pretty sure I edit manuscripts the same way. I have no manuscript to edit, yet. After 4 years of academic reading and running the university's literary journal, it felt weird not having something to read or edit. In a month, when I started my new job, I would probably have plenty to read. Right now, though, I could read anything. What a thrill! My instinct was to call Freddie and enjoy this revelation together. He would certainly be feeling the same way. I can't do that now, not after the last few days. Calling him now would be a bad idea. Emotions had run high. Every moment had been filled with tension from the moment he had proposed until the moment I walked out the door with my father leading the way. The apartment, empty but for the furniture it had come with, was a weird metaphor for the state of our relationship. I already missed him and there was a little voice in my head insisting that I had made the wrong decision. "I'm going to find a book," I said. "Have fun, sweetie," Karen said without looking up. I made my way right into Hudson News. I could easily find the most popular books on their shelves. I had a lot of options of varying quality. It had been so long since I had paid attention to popular books that I didn't know where to start. The display was dominated by the Harry Potter series. Mary had purchased the audiobooks for me as a graduation gift. She swore the reader, Jim Dale, was amazing. I would be happy to catch up with Harry Potter, but the CDs were at my father's apartment in New York City. "All the girls your age are picking up that book, Eclipse," the lady at the counter said. I picked it up, read the back, rolled my eyes, and put it back. "Vampires aren't my thing," I said. "The whole series is very popular. We sell more of these than anything else." I picked up the first one, Twilight, and looked at the blurb. I guess I should know what's popular these days. I mean, the smart books to publish are the ones that will sell. I shrugged and put it under my arm. "What about this book, Bunk?" I asked the woman. I picked up a book with a very simple, white cover. I knew the author and had read at least one other book by her. "Oh, be careful with that one," the woman whispered. "It's about sex." I took both books up to the counter and paid for them. Again, I felt that tug to call Freddie. He would love to read Bunk. My return to the gate was met with no reaction from the other two people traveling with me. I sat down and opened Twilight. I barely got past the prologue before I was irritated. I pushed through, reading for about 15 minutes and was disgusted as a result. There were so many issues, mostly grammatical. "Karen, did you ever read this book?" I asked Karen, who didn't look up for her manuscript. "Which book, Emma?" "Twilight." That got Karen's attention. She looked up and over to me, putting the cover on her red pen. "That book is trash," Karen said. "Don't read it." "Too late." Karen sighed. "That book should never have been published, Emma. There are so many problems, the least of which is the abusive and controlling boyfriend." "The vampire?" I asked. "Yes, and he sparkles in the sunlight." "Sun?" "Oh yes. She made up her own rules about vampires." I thought I would read it to see what's popular. I guess that is a good idea. Another good reason to read it is to know what we will not be publishing together. What else did you get? The new Mary Roach book, Bank. That was a good choice. You enjoyed it, didn't you, Walter? My father just nodded his head. Karen and I looked at him. I was waiting to see if he would look up and acknowledge something. I wonder what Karen was expecting him to do. Why don't you go get a snack, Emma? Karen said. I didn't argue, I was being shooed away. I went to Starbucks and got an iced tea. I took my time walking down the pathway past shoe shine stations, restaurants, and places to buy snacks. As soon as I smelled the popcorn, I knew what I wanted to eat. My nose led me to the Nuts on Clark shop. I was overwhelmed with junk food options, but it was the fresh movie theater popcorn that made me hungry. I just want that, I said to the girl behind the counter. I was pointing at the glass container next to her. It was full of popcorn. She didn't answer, but pulled out a wax paper bag, filled it about halfway with fresh popcorn, slid the bag into a box, and filled up the rest of the box. I took 5 fluffy pieces out of the box and stuffed them into my mouth as I walked back to our seats. We will shortly begin boarding Flight 143 to LaGuardia Airport. We have a full flight, so overhead storage will be limited. If you have a large bag, please bring it to the counter so we can check it. This is free and your bag will be available at the gate in New York, the airline employee said through the speakers around our gate. I picked up my pace as I walked back to the gate. The crowd had grown. My father and Karen were standing close to the gate door. There you are, Karen said as I came back. She handed me my bag. She had packed it up for me. I took my boarding pass out of my pocket and waited in silence. It was weird to not have either of them talking to each other or to me. My father was deeper in his head than he had ever been before. Karen, too, was silent and distant. I had a sudden thought that I had made the wrong choice. I wanted to call Freddie, tell him I loved him, and go to Los Angeles to be with him. Then the feeling was gone. My father clearly needed help. Karen didn't know how to help him and my sisters couldn't do this. More importantly, I had spent years working for a career in publishing and it was days away. What I needed to do was get on this plane and put Freddie behind me. I got on the plane determined not to think about Frederick Wentworth anymore. June 2016. How do you kill an hour at the airport? How do you kill an hour at the airport when Frederick really isn't speaking to you? How do you kill an hour at the airport when Frederick really isn't speaking to you and you don't know what to say to him? The last time I sat here, I had been on my way back to New York City after graduation. I am pretty sure we were at this exact gate. I thought back to that trip out of Chicago and remembered 2 things. First, I had tried to read Twilight and I wanted to call Frederick many times. Now I was sitting here with Frederick and didn't know what to say to him. This was the first time we had been alone together on this entire book tour. Well, other than our fight a few days ago. The tension between us had broken, but that was because we were exhausted by the entire tour and, more importantly, Louisa's accident. Frederick sat in a chair and plugged in his phone to charge. I am going to find something to read. Do you want me to get you anything? I asked. No, I'm good. I walked over to Hudson News. I had finished all the books I had brought to read. I had finished all the manuscripts and few books I had grabbed at PubCon. I needed something to read if I was going to get through this flight. The man at the register was busy helping others as I walked around the book displays looking for something good. The main display was Frederick's book. I took a picture and quickly emailed it to Christy. Other than his book, there was nothing new and exciting, but I did spot the latest Erik Larson book, Deadwake. I loved his stuff and, for a brief moment, wondered if Frederick would want to read it too. I picked it up along with the Aziz Ansari book, Modern Romance. I walked back to the gate thinking that if Frederick wanted to read one, I would read the other. When I was back at the gate, I saw that Frederick was asleep. I put the books on top of my bag and went over to Starbucks and Nuts on Clark. I wanted to get an iced tea and popcorn. Both were in the same place they had been 8 years ago. I walked back to the gate and saw, this time, Frederick was awake and reading the back of both books, one in each hand. "Are you hungry?" I asked. "No, did you buy these books?" Frederick asked. "I have nothing else to read. If you want to read one, I can read the other. You don't mind?" "No." Frederick put down Deadwake and started leafing through Modern Romance. I sat down in the chair next to our bags. I picked up Deadwake, but didn't open it up. I wanted to talk to Frederick. Last time I had been here, I had resisted the desire to call and talk to him. I opened my mouth and closed it a few times. I had no idea what to say to him. It would have been so easy 8 years ago. Now, he wasn't even paying attention to me. "You must be happy to almost be done with this tour," I said. "Yep," Frederick said without looking up. "Your book was the main display in the store here." "Cool." I gave up and sat back to read Deadwake and eat popcorn. I put the popcorn on the seat between us. Every so often, without a work, Frederick reached into the box and took some popcorn. I couldn't help but smile. "We will shortly begin boarding Flight 143 to LaGuardia Airport. We have a full flight, so overhead storage will be limited. If you have a large bag, please bring it to the counter so we can check it. This is free and your bag will be available at the gate in New York," said a voice through the speakers. "Can I keep this?" Frederick asked as he held up the book. "Sure. Thanks." Frederick stuck the book into his bag and got up to walk to the door that would lead up to the plane. I followed him and we waited in silence. Things weren't as tense as they had been during the book tour, but I was confident that he was over me. I had put him out of my mind 8 years ago as I boarded this same plane. I decided I was going to have to do it again. At least he wouldn't be with me on Cape Cod. 2 years later. It's just frustrating to see all these used books getting posted for sale and knowing I won't get any money from that. It should be protected by copyright. I saw a waitress passing with hors d'oeuvres and grabbed a toothpick-speared meatball as she walked by. I needed to put something into my mouth, so I didn't say something nasty. I had already overheard this guy having the same conversation with others. "That's not how this industry works," Karen said. "Why not?" "This is my intellectual property. I should be paid. You wouldn't be able to just burn a copy of a CD and sell it to your friends. But you can sell used CDs. Once someone has paid for the item, they can do what they want with it. You made your money on the original sale." There was no way Karen could convince this man that he was wrong. I looked around the room, hoping to spot Frederick somewhere. "Do you think Frederick Wentworth has to deal with people reselling his book?" "You should ask his wife about that," Karen said, turning to me. "Why?" "You're already speaking to me, that's why," I said, after swallowing. Frederick has plenty of copies of his books sold as used books. He donates copies to local libraries all the time. He would rather focus on sharing his books instead of worrying about his control over everything. Karen wore a look of self-satisfaction, but clearly this man was about to launch into another tirade. "Don't get me started on libraries," the man said. "Will you excuse me? I see someone I want to catch up with," I said, taking this as my cue to leave. I wandered over to the hotel bar looking for someone to chat with. I had lost track of Frederick almost as soon as we arrived at the party. It had been 2 years since I had last been at PubCon, and I wasn't feeling as excited about it as I once had. So much had changed since the last time I was here. I saw a seat empty at the bar and quickly made my way over before someone else grabbed it. The bartender placed a glass of soda water in front of me. I had ordered 2 of these already. "Thank you," I said with a smile. "My pleasure," the bartender responded with his own smile. I sat there calculating how much longer we had to spend here. I'm not used to attending these. This is the realm of marketing and the author's publicist. When I lived here, I often had plenty to do after the conference and never went to other parties. I only attended parties for my authors. Now I was an outsider married to a celebrity author. Not only that, but my current employer and my past employer are in some type of turf war over Frederick. This party is clearly an attempt to show Frederick what he is missing by working with a smaller publisher. It is not a secret that they are desperate to get him back and publishing with them. His first book, the only one with them, has been a big win for them. My departure resulted in many of my popular authors following me. The blame had fallen on Karen. I felt horrible for her, but understood how things had progressed. Frederick and I agreed to come to the party because we wanted to at least make her feel supported. "Excuse me, is your name Earl Grey?" "Because you look like a hot tea," said a voice behind me. That is a terrible pickup line. "Where did you hear it?" I said, turning around to face my husband. "I found it on some random web page. I have been waiting to use it for years." I laughed as I rolled my eyes. "It's a good thing I already married you." Frederick pushed his way between me and the next person at the crowded bar. He placed a quick kiss on my lips. "So, that means it worked. You're coming home with me?" "Sure." We quietly left the party 30 minutes later. The hotel was only about a mile away from our apartment in Midtown. It was a bright, clear, and cool night in New York City. We walked hand in hand through the streets of New York City. I don't think I have ever been this happy in this city in my entire adult life. "Did they try to woo you?" I eventually asked. "Of course they did." "Did it work?" "Nope. You can publish with them again if you want. We won't be upset." "They put too much pressure on me," Frederick said. We had talked about that pressure many times. Yes, it had brought them back together, but it wasn't good for Frederick. Even now, I am always aware of the pressure I put on him professionally. "I like that we just go home, instead of to a hotel," Frederick said. "Me too." We moved closer together as we walked. Soon Frederick had his arm wrapped around my shoulders and I felt him kiss the top of her head. I wrapped my arm around his waist and let him pull me against his body. By the time we got to the apartment, we were both feeling playful and giggling as we removed each other's clothes. "How much did we drink last night?" Frederick said as he woke up. I was groggy, but it was the first day of PubCon and Louisa was waiting for me. We were finally ready to be at PubCon. It involved having hundreds of free advanced reader editions of books, swag for those they couldn't afford to give away yet, a booth that cost over $10,000 for the week, the cost of the booth display, and the staff to manage the desk. I was excited that the company was ready to take this step. I only drank water, I said, getting out of bed. I thought back to our walk home. There had been a group of teenagers in front of us and the scent of pot. My memory of what happened at home was probably wrong, but I was sure we had been super productive. Our clothes were thrown everywhere, a bag of microwave popcorn was open on the floor, and a pad of paper at the foot of the bed had random words written on it. Last thing I remember was taking off your clothes, Frederick said. I think we got a contact high. Frederick started laughing as I walked into the bathroom for a shower. You getting a contact high makes sense, he said, still chuckling, when I came back into the bedroom. You haven't smoked any pot in nearly 2 years. Your tolerance must be gone, I said as I reached for the pad. The words were in Frederick's handwriting. What the hell did I write? Frederick asked. I handed him the pad. I couldn't make sense of it at all. He looked it over and tossed it on the bedside table with a shrug. We need water. We can't be hungover at PubCon, he said, getting out of bed. No, I can't be hungover. You're just there to get books and hang out. Aside from scheduled meetings with potential authors, I spent my day at the booth. Frederick would periodically stop by to leave some books. I hid them under a table with plans to let Mary pick through them that night. My younger sister, now pregnant with her 3rd child, was going to come over for dinner that night. I accepted that she would just pick through the books and get Hollywood gossip from Frederick. I missed spending time with her. We planned only one author signing for day 1, and the response was spectacular. I was feeling energized and focused on getting ready for my big event. Penny had finally signed a contract and we had published her memoir. She was speaking at a breakfast the next morning and her book will be released in a few weeks. Her signing was being placed in an ADA-compliant spot, so I wanted to make sure everything was working smoothly. I had been fighting with PubCon's organizers a little to make sure they found the best space for both Penny and those who were likely to come to her signing. I even had to remind the organizers about the danger that could come from not giving enough room for the crowds. How do people recognize me? Frederick said when he came by the booth around lunchtime. The lengths he had gone to hide his identity made me giggle. Since I had last seen him, he had put on a promotional hat from Penguin and his sunglasses. Maybe you keep bumping into people because you can't see with sunglasses on? Maybe you are so striking and handsome that people just can't help looking at you? I said. Frederick gave me a wink. Oh, I told everyone you are walking around, Louisa said. Why? Frederick asked. Because you are. I'll do the same for Seth tomorrow when he's here. Louisa, do I need to remind you of what happened last time Frederick was here? I asked. These aren't animals, Emma. These are industry professionals. Don't underestimate librarians. I once watched a very respected librarian, who once ran the Boston Public Library, run from one of the exhibits to the other just for a Harry Potter tote bag, I said. Is it weird to be back? Penny asked me the next morning while we were sitting in the waiting room before her breakfast panel. Yes, there is this weird romanticism to what happened 2 years ago. Most people are curious about what happened. They all seem to think that Freddie just swept me off my feet on the tour and I simply gave up everything to be with him. Nobody wants to admit the professional shenanigans that were happening. How is Karen acting? I sighed and Penny smirked. You know, last time I was here was the first time I had seen Frederick in 8 years, I said, avoiding that same conversation myself. This time you are finally getting the thing you pushed me to do for years. Maybe next year it will be Tom again or Layla Dreyfus. Oh, that wouldn't be a surprise. We already signed him and she is finally done with her old contract and can sign with us. Both will follow me anywhere. Does that make me the big win? Penny, you are one of my best friends. You are always going to be the big win. Do you need my help, sweetheart? My father said while I was setting up the books for Penny's signing that afternoon. Walter was at his first pubcon in years. He was only here for the day to see if he could find some new authors who needed a freelance editor. He had been successful by lunch and was now looking for something else to do. Find the nice markers, the ones that won't bleed through the page, I said. Got it, he said and wandered off, looking into various bags and boxes. At least he has come back from the edge, Penny said when Walter was out of earshot. He had done a complete 180. How about the hoarding? I think it's mostly over. He started visiting a therapist. Karen is still Karen and Elizabeth is still Elizabeth, but your dad seems so much better. Some people don't want to change, I said with a shrug. Found them. My dad called from across the staging area. I gave him a thumbs up as he walked back over. Ready? I asked Penny. I don't think I was this nervous about testifying before Congress. That's because this is publishing, you just put your heart and soul into the world. We had a large celebratory dinner that night with the entire company and my family. Our 2 days at the conference were a huge success for the authors we were publishing and for identifying new authors. We were skipping the public day. The company was ready to share with people within our industry, but it would be a while before we would be ready to do the public day. The first round of drinks are on me, Walter said as we sat down. My father was clearly feeling the delight of being back in his element. He had always loved the autographing booths at PubCon. They were away from the main flow of the exhibit floor. I had watched him during Penny's signing. He kept handing Penny books to sign and instructing Louisa on how to maintain the steady flow. He made sure there were fresh pens and paper being given to people in line so they could write names for inscriptions. He even instructed the volunteers on how to encourage people to get into line. I had to wonder if he had missed his second calling. My father also loved to celebrate victories and good news. Watching him now made me remember how little good news and victories there had been since my mother had died. Poor Mary had so much good news ignored during Walter's depression. Now my younger sister and Tommy were basking in the light of Walter's happiness. Neither of her previous pregnancies had gotten anywhere near as much attention. Mary told everyone it was because this time she was having a girl and Walter liked being surrounded by his girls. The waiter placed our drinks in front of each person. We lifted our glasses to toast to Penny, PubCon, Mary and the baby, and future successes. You didn't get a drink? Walter said, looking across the table at me. I have a glass of soda water. That's what I want. I caught Frederick's eye and knew it was time to share our news. OMG, you're pregnant. Mary said, 3 octaves higher than normal. I couldn't help but blush. We had originally planned to announce it once we were out on Cape Cod next month. I wanted Mary to have as much attention as she could get before I claimed a bigger share. Only 2 months along, I said. We are going to have babies together. Mary said. You're having a baby? Walter said. Are you excited, Daddy? I asked. I watched my father's eyes fill with tears and I had the answer I needed. What if? I made my way back to my apartment with the box of Mediterranean food in my hands. The whole walk to Columbus Circle and time at the fountain left me feeling disjointed. Frederick had been in my apartment and had picked up my dinner, but had ignored me. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, obsessing over little details and interpreting meaning. "Emma," I heard someone say. I stopped and turned to see Frederick jogging up to me. "I've been calling your name," Frederick said when he was closer. "Sorry, I didn't hear you. Is something wrong?" "Yes, no. I must have looked confused, but it wasn't like he was making much sense. I watched him take a deep breath as if he was about to start a rant. "I'm sorry if you're unhappy that I'm the one going on the tour with you," I said. "They're just so anxious about Dash. I love you." This was not what I expected him to say, and I didn't know how to respond. Wasn't he mad at me for breaking his heart? Hadn't he made an entire movie to show the world how horrible I was and how much he was over it? "What?" I asked. "I love you and I want to be with you. It's all I've ever wanted." I could feel the tears building and I couldn't seem to breathe anymore. "Emma," Frederick said as the first tear spilled out of my eye. He slowly leaned in and put his hand on my cheek before kissing me. We stood there, in the middle of the street, kissing for what felt like forever. "I still love you," I said when we finally broke apart. "Stay with me tonight." Being with him again felt like I hadn't ever been without him. Waking up in his arms, in my bedroom, felt more natural than it had when we lived in Chicago. "Does this mean we are back together?" Frederick asked the next morning. We were still in bed, kissing as the dark of night faded and the sun rose. This question was what I had been thinking about as I fell asleep. I didn't have an answer because asking it only led to more questions. What does it mean to be back together? We do what we couldn't do last time, find a way to be together that doesn't give one of us an advantage over the other. There isn't an easy answer, I said with a sigh. We have a month together to figure it out. We lay facing each other in silence for a few moments. We can't tell anyone, I said. I could see the irritation on his face. Why don't you want anyone to know about us? Why did you keep it a secret in the first place? I don't want to keep it a secret, I need to. We are spending a month together for professional reasons. I am here as your publisher and representing a company that is very anxious about this book being successful. This could get me fired. We aren't just sleeping together, we're supposed to be together. I didn't respond right away. If you had just told everyone that we have a history, it would be fine, Frederick eventually said. It doesn't matter now. I have to think about my career as much as I have to think about us. We need the time to figure this out, let's just keep it to ourselves, please. So, you want to act like there's nothing going on? I was going to suggest we share a room and other things we would do if we were together. You do know you're probably going to meet a bunch of my friends in LA? It's not all or nothing, Freddie. We just can't be obvious. I watched his face relax. I need to tell Patrick. He will need to be able to react if something bad actually does happen. As long as he won't use it to increase attention to you. We can trust him. I smiled, feeling like I had dodged a bullet. Frederick kissed me and pulled me closer to him. You have to go back to your hotel to get ready for morning shows, I said, pushing away. Come with me? No, you talk to Patrick alone first. Fine, then I am checking out of the hotel and staying here until we leave New York. I couldn't stop the smile from spreading across my face. My God, you look beautiful, Frederick said as he stood behind me and kissed the back of my neck. When did you become this goddess? I smiled and finished clasping my necklace before I turned to face him. Your tie is crooked, I said as I fixed it. When did you learn to tie a bow tie? Oh, Freddie, I have always known. This is my world. When I was finished, he placed a kiss on my lips. Patrick will be here soon. He said he will be here early so Louisa doesn't realize I'm staying here. Thank you. It wasn't long before we heard the buzz of Patrick arriving at the door. I let him into the apartment. Patrick had rented his tux this morning, but it looked like it had been altered to fit him perfectly. I just want to say, for the record, this makes me very happy, Patrick said after he closed the door. Thank you, I said. I just wish you'd tell Louisa. She'll be the only one in the dark and she seems to be infatuated with Frederick. I'm not ready for that. I understand, but I just wanted it said, Patrick said with a smile. The tour went on without any incident. We all got into an easy rhythm as we traveled from city to city. I called each hotel and canceled one hotel room so I could share a room with Frederick. Louisa didn't seem to care that I was the focus of his attention. It wasn't until our arrival in LA that she realized things were different. What do you mean you aren't staying at the hotel? Louisa asked as we waited for our bags at the airport. I have a friend who lives here and I am going to stay with her. Who? Someone from college. You'll be fine. We don't really have to do much while we're here. You can come hang out with Victor and me, Patrick said. I just want to sit and get a tan, Louisa said to him. I have a pool. Why don't you just come stay with us? Really? Yeah, we are going to all of the parties for the book promotion. You'll get to everything. I can't wait to introduce you to everyone. They aren't going to believe that you are Emma. Frederick said when we were alone in the taxi to his apartment. What do they think of me? He was silent and looked away. Freddie? Do they think of me the way you wrote me in the movie? No, not all of them. I don't talk about you a lot. You obviously did at one point. Should be ready for anger? No, you aren't anything like they'll expect. Trust me, I think they'll like you and be angry with me. I have to tell you something then. What? I finally told him about the meeting I had with Ted at his publishing company. I had kept it to myself because I didn't want Frederick to think he would so quickly and easily get his way. I had only agreed to the meeting with Ted because it was a possible solution. You have a job interview? Frederick said. His eyes were wide with excitement, exactly the reaction I expected. Slow down, it's just a chat. This would be perfect. Maybe we could even do both coasts if you have a job like this. This was the first time he had mentioned the idea of being bicoastal. There was a simplicity to this and I was surprised we had never thought of that 8 years before. If Ted really wanted me to work for him, I could insist that I be allowed to be bicoastal. I hadn't even heard the details of what Ted wanted me to do for him, but I felt confident that it could be done from any place. Frederick's excitement was infectious and I allowed him to pull me into it. His small apartment lacked the comfort I expected, but it was his space. I was in his bed and his arms. It always felt right, no matter where we were. His friends were wonderful and gave him a hard time about how he had described me for the last 8 years. By the time I got to my meeting with Ted, there was little he had to do to convince me that my old list of concerns were valid. I could have the career I wanted, the friends I needed, and I wouldn't grow to resent Frederick for bringing me here. He didn't even care that I might not come with any of my authors. When I started to ask about the geography issues, I learned my father had shared more than I knew. Emma, if you want to work on both coasts, we can make that work. We'll need someone to be at PubCon and you can always work remotely in the summer, Ted said when I asked him about bicoastal work. Really? They would never let me do that now. No, Karen wouldn't let you do that. She needs you because you're all she has left. Everyone knows why you're on this tour. We never go on tours. You are saving their butts in more ways than one, but you aren't complaining about it because you get to be with Frederick. You have more options and experience than you did at 22. He was right and I knew it. I just had to find a way to make our relationship public. Frederick had respected my wishes so far. Nobody, other than Patrick, seemed to know we were together, but it was clear that people suspected. Louisa was the first to complain while we traveled, switching Patrick for Seth, to Chicago. I'm just so happy, Louisa said to me as we had drinks at the airport. She and I were alone to discuss the events in Chicago. Because you fell in love? I asked. Yes, and because you have too. What are you talking about? Do you think I didn't notice? The looks you and Freddie give each other. Don't call him Freddie. No, because only you can? I hear you, even when you think nobody is listening. You call him Freddie all the time. You smile at him in a way you never smile at anyone. You giggle at his jokes, which he whispers in your ear. You get him the exact perfect cup of tea and sing your little cup of tea song. You usually only sing it when you make your own tea. You always seem to be next to him or touching him. He was the person you stayed with in LA. I sat there, unsure how to react. Come on, Emma. You can tell me the truth. You're totally in love with him. You didn't want to, but you did. Someone told me that you aren't even his type. Why keep it a secret? Louisa cajoled. You can't say anything to anyone. Why not? What's the big deal? This isn't as new as you think it is, and we are here representing him professionally. You and Seth are not in the same position, but I could get fired for being with Freddie right now. Louisa's eyes got bigger and I watched her mouth fall open. I'm serious, Louisa. Okay. When we get out to the Cape, then I will tell everyone. For now, just keep quiet. Don't even tell Mary. She'll be so pissed that I knew first. Yes. Does Frederick know it's a secret? Obviously, so please keep it to yourself. Louisa rolled her eyes, and that was all I needed. She was true to her word and didn't talk about it. I spent time in Chicago thinking about Ted's job offer. He had emailed me a formal offer that was nearly everything I could ask for in a job offer. I knew the drawback of the job was the high risk of failure with this company. Ted was putting everything into this investment. The pressure made me anxious. You know you're amazing at this, Frederick said over dinner one night when I shared my anxiety with him. It's just so much pressure. I'm shocked you aren't running things already. You always left me with the impression that you'd been set up for that all along. Yes, but dash. No buts. Just ignore me wanting you to do this so we can be together. You are being offered an amazing professional opportunity to do what you do best. You would be a fool to turn it down. How many authors would actually be free to follow you? That last question had me looking over my contracts to see how many would be willing to come with me. I even contacted a few trusted authors like Tom Scott and Layla Dreyfus to see if they would follow when their contracts were over. Frederick reminded me about Penny, who would probably finally sign a contract to publish her memoir. When we left Chicago, I felt really confident and positive about taking the job. Even Frederick was talking about how we should consider buying a house together in LA and then use my apartment when we were in New York. It all felt too easy, but at the same time as if this was meant to happen this way all along. I would have the job and freedom to reach my own dreams. I would have friends. I would be with Frederick and not completely dependent on him. Then we got back to New York and I made one mistake. Hey, I know you are on the plane home, but, did you cancel Frederick's hotel room? Christy asked in the voicemail. I'm going to meet you guys at the airport so I can take him to a new room. I'm sure you're tired and want to go home. We were walking through the airport to get our luggage when I finally heard the message. She sounded confused, but was also forcing a cheerfulness that was clearly fake. I messed up, I said to Frederick. What? Christy realized I canceled your hotel room and she got you a new one. She's pissed. So? I will just check out and come to you after. You can't do that. You have to stay at the hotel. Stay with me then. She'll see my stuff when she comes to the room. She'll see me in the room. Frederick sighed as we got to baggage claim. Christy was there waiting for us and looking pissed. Louisa and Seth, who had been walking at their own pace, were already there with her. I could see Louisa trying to introduce Seth, but was being ignored. Christy was watching me. So, I guess this means we're spending the next 3 days apart? Frederick said before we were in earshot. I tried to smile, but Christy was now making her way to us. She had a walking cast on her leg and her arm in a cast and sling. Hi, I said when she was close enough. You look a lot better than you did the last time I saw you. What is going on? Why did you cancel the hotel? Where's Patrick? Patrick decided there were too many people on the tour, Frederick said. So you replaced him with Louisa's new boyfriend? He is paying for his own trip, I said. You're lucky the book is doing so well and the tour has come in under budget. It looks like you canceled hotel rooms in every city, Christy said. Oh, Emma and I realized we could share a hotel room and it would be easier, Louisa said as she and Seth walked over with all our bags in tow. Even in Chicago when Seth was with you? I sighed. I didn't want to lie. Why does it matter how many rooms we had? The tour is fine and I canceled the hotel room here because Frederick has someone else he wants to stay with. The tour has been a huge success and our bosses have to be pleased with that. Christy didn't respond. I don't have to stay with my friend, Frederick eventually said. Great, I'll take you over to the hotel. I smiled at Frederick as he followed Christy outside. I returned to work the next day. I considered taking time off, but I decided I needed to focus on my departure from the company and see contracts for all my authors. Emma, can you come in and give us an update on the book tour? I looked up to see one of the executives, Carl, at my door. I was sitting at my desk, piles of contracts on either side of me. I was suddenly glad I had a habit of scanning these and keeping them on my own hard drive at home. Sure. I followed him into the conference room where a bunch of the executives were sitting, including Karen, who looked angry. What do you need to know? I asked when I sat down. How do you think the tour went? I think it went well, but Louisa and I didn't need to be there. The sales have exceeded expectations. That was primarily due to Christie's work before the tour started and Patrick's promotion of events. I felt like I was there to babysit. Christie gave us her budget update and you came in under budget. We were able to save a little money by cutting back on hotel rooms. Both Louisa and I found other places to stay in LA, so that saved a little money. Then her boyfriend paid for his own trip and she stayed with him. I am sure it was just a fraction of the budget. We want to talk to you about something that Christie brought up to us this morning. She told us you canceled a hotel room for Frederick in New York. She also mentioned that Louisa allowed her new boyfriend to travel with you. Frederick said he had someone else to stay with here. Seth, as I mentioned, was paying for his own trip. He also works with Frederick, so they've spent a lot of time collaborating on a project. None of it has disrupted the tour in any way. Christie has a lot of concerns over behavior on the tour. She thinks the cancelled rooms indicate something else was going on. She believes you are having an affair with Frederick. I didn't respond right away. I was trying to follow Christie's logic to realizing what was going on. Really? I asked. Yes, she said she noticed something between the two of you as early as PubCon. She also thinks you edited Frederick's story before she even saw it. She has raised a lot of concerns over your professionalism on this tour. How could you, Emma? Karen said. Until now only Carl had spoken. I could feel my heart start to race. Everything I had been trying to prevent this month was coming all at once. Let me stop you here, because I think you need to be reminded of something, I started, taking a deep breath. I have been with this company for 8 years. I started by helping authors and publicists plan their book tours, but never before have we sent anyone on the tour. I understand why you were anxious about this tour and why you thought it was important to allow Christie to represent the company when she asked. I can tell you, having spent the last month on the tour, that sending 2 people was completely unnecessary. That's not for you to decide, Carl said. I am aware, but let me continue. You should also know that in the past 8 years, I have assumed the plan was for me to someday take over my family's imprint. I am an editor in high demand. I am sure you have noticed contracts that specifically request me as an editor and want language that allows them to walk away from the contract if I walk away from the company. Clearly something else is going on and I am very aware that someone or something is keeping me from moving forward in my career. How dare you accuse me of holding you back? Karen said. I don't think it's on purpose, but if you think it rests on your shoulders then it probably does, I said to Karen before turning back to Carl. What Karen clearly hasn't shared in her logic for refusing Frederick's book before Christie saw it. 8 years ago, I ended a 2-year relationship with him. You just forced me to spend a month with a man I was once in love with, but haven't spoken to since. Yes, Christie did sense something between us and yes, I did edit his book 10 years ago. Being with Frederick for a month has rekindled something. So, you aren't denying having an affair? Carl asked. What I am saying is that by forcing me to go on the tour, you have reunited me with the man I love. Before you respond, know that it has also caused me to reevaluate my decisions. I have allowed my career to stall. It doesn't matter who has used that to their advantage, I should have been fighting for what I want. What I want right now is on the West Coast. I have been offered an amazing opportunity to help another publishing company. I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice. No, you can't quit, Karen said, jumping up from her chair and storming out of the room. The remaining executives looked at each other and Carl nodded. 2 weeks won't be necessary. Today can be your last day. We will allow you to take your planned vacation as a thank you for taking on the tour at the last minute, Carl said for the group. You do understand that I am taking a number of authors with me? Yes, as long as they are the ones who have that specific language in their contracts. Others will follow when their contracts are over. We will worry about that when the time comes. All right, I will finish the day and talk to HR about my departure. Thank you for making this so easy. Thank you for giving me the tools I need for the next phase in my career. I found Frederick waiting for me in the lobby later that afternoon. Christy said you had a tough day, Frederick said when he saw me. She told them we're having an affair. Well, technically it does appear that way. I quit. I watched Frederick's face light up. Does this make it official? I had to smile. It hurt to leave so abruptly, but it was like a weight lifted. Yes, I still had to tell my family what was happening and deal with Karen, but I wasn't worried about that anymore. Sally's best life. I stood there, looking at the three-story modern office complex with its glass walls and full parking lot. I decided to stop setting up expectations for what this publishing company would be like. I had fantasized about this interview for days, ever since Emma Shaw called me for the phone interview. I knew who Emma Shaw was, mostly because she was married to Frederick Wentworth. They were a frequent topic on gossip blogs that were my guilty pleasure. I liked talking to her, but still imagined her to be tall and elegant like she would appear at premieres and parties. The gossip blogs loved to watch her because she had an excellent sense of style and was kind to them. Plus, when they discovered how much she inspired Frederick's writing, they decided to learn as much as they could about her. Even I had a fangirl moment on the phone call when I realized working for her could give me access to people I never imagined I'd meet. My expectation of her framed my hope for the job as a cover designer for their books. I expected a high rise in downtown Los Angeles with people in suits and important literary people wandering around. I had researched their authors and learned the role Emma had played in shaping this publishing company as a major player in the industry. My mother was thrilled because of their history as an academic publisher. I walked into the building and checked in at a security desk. I was handed a visitor badge and directed to their office suite on the top floor. When I got out of the elevator, there was only one door to enter, so I opened it and walked into a busy office with an empty reception desk. I waited for someone to come greet me, and about a minute later, a skinny, tiny Latino woman came back to the desk and brought me into a conference room. I was the only one there. They'll be here soon. Do you want something to drink? She asked me when she noticed I was confused. While she went to get me a bottle of water, I pulled out my tablet and pulled up my portfolio. As I got comfortable, I looked around the conference room. It was a state-of-the-art space with chargers in the middle of the table, a camera mounted under the television, speakers embedded into the wall, and a microphone set up in the middle of the table. I saw on the television screensaver was information about connecting devices to display over Wi-Fi. I followed the directions and connected my tablet so we could look through my work. I could see the office working through the glass walls of the conference room. People would walk by and smile or wave at me. It felt like a friendly, relaxed environment. When a couple walked toward the room, I knew the interview was officially beginning. She was clearly Emma. Her brown hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore a black and white polka-dot dress. The man, I assumed, was her partner Ted. He was past middle age, but walked a step behind her. She held the door open for him before they both welcomed me to their offices. "I'm so glad you were able to come out to California to chat with us," Ted said when we were settled. I'm fascinated by your background. How does someone go from a bachelor's in political science to an MFA? I thought about how much to answer. I wanted to be fair to my mother, but to be clear that I had a passion and talent for graphic design. I grew up in both worlds. My father is a classical musician, so art and music were an important part of my childhood. I watched my mother climb the ranks of academic administration at different universities before she became president of a small liberal arts university in Massachusetts. Lackack State? Emma asked. Yes, I continued, turning my attention to her. The pressure to live up to her expectations was higher than that from my father. He simply wanted me to be happy but never really gave me a path to happiness. My mother had a path but didn't really care about happiness. Emma chuckled to herself as she met Ted's eyes. I suspected this was something she has experienced, and he had observed. I continued, it was easy to follow her path since it was all planned out, but I was never comfortable in my position. I took graphic design and art classes as electives. I considered changing my major, but I would have added another year and a half of work. I kept the poli-sci major, minored in graphic design, and then immediately enrolled in an MFA program to pursue my passion. How did you get into book cover design? Ted asked. I took my time with this answer. I was surprised that Ted was taking the lead with the interview, but then I remembered that Emma and I had already discussed some of these things in a less direct way. This was his interview more than hers. By accident, I said, making eye contact with him again. I started working for clubs on campus at Lackack State, and the literary magazine asked me to design their cover. I think they did it to impress my mother, but I saw the opportunity. I love to read and hate the adage that you can't judge a book by its cover. Why not? The cover design should be part of the overall marketing plan. I started doing some research about modern cover design and creating pre-made covers to make some extra money while I got my MFA. The interview continued with general interview questions about my strengths, my ability to work with a team, and a review of my portfolio. We talked about my approach to graphic design for book covers for longer than I expected. After an hour together, which passed quicker than I realized, I had the chance to ask my questions. My mother was impressed when I told her about this interview because of the company's history in academic publishing, I said, directing my question to Ted. Clearly, the company is heading in a different direction with more popular titles. Where is the company heading in the future? I watched as Ted smiled at me but turned to Emma for the answer. We have just begun our strategic planning process for the next 5 years, Emma said, taking the cue quickly. We need to consider retirements and changes within the industry. The big publishers are consolidating, smaller publishers come and go in months. Self-publishing is increasingly popular as the big retailers open options to these authors. We're looking at hybrid publishing models where we offer our editing, graphic, and marketing services to indie authors for a fee. We're careful to not venture into the world of vanity publishing with this since it would be effortless to go in that direction. We're also looking at changes to ebook publishing in general. We're considering acquiring a company that does augmented book publishing, layering in other content to the ebooks they publish. Both these could increase the work our graphic designers do. It would create opportunities beyond book cover design. We're already expanding our publication to collaborative projects. For example, our popular young adult series would benefit from graphic novels, coloring books, and other merchandising options, Ted said. If you were interested, you could work with those authors and artists. We're also moving into crafting non-fiction books. We recently published Jack Dreyfus' first cookbook and are looking for more opportunities, Emma said, picking up the conversation. I was impressed by the way they worked together. Neither talking over the other, but able to build on what they were saying. If you're interested in publishing knitting books, I know the Woodhouse family and have a friend who works for them, I said, not thinking before I spoke. Emma tilted her head. I had said something she hadn't expected. I didn't realize you knew them. They are based in the town of Lacuk. Their flagship store is there, and they have been big investors in the university since before World War II. My mother often works with them, I said, but thought about Amelia's position with the family. My friend works for their family's foundation and is friends with Carrie Woodhouse, who is very involved in the fiber community around the country. She knows pattern designers, and they've been talking about self-publishing a book. I suspect it's because they don't have any connections in publishing. Emma and Ted shared a look before they both turned back to me with a smile. I didn't say anything, but that was because I could see the receptionist walking toward the room and tall, thin Frederick Wentworth walk past her with a little girl in his arms. The child waved at people as her father passed desks. I could see people waving back at her with smiles on their faces. Emma, the receptionist said, poking her head into the room. Your lunch meeting has arrived. Ted laughed. If you get the job, you'll have to get used to Emma's lunch meetings. They often involve a toddler running around the office. I smiled at the thought of spending any time around someone famous. Let me walk you out, Ted said as they both got up from the table. I quickly packed up my tablet and followed Ted as he led me to the exit. How many other people are you interviewing? I asked him once we were back at reception. Not many, he said, turning to face me. I suspect you'll hear from us soon. I smiled and shook his hand before walking out. Within 2 hours, I had a phone call to let me know they'd like to hire me and a contract in my email. 150 pounds lifted. I'm sorry, Bella, I can't work with you anymore. I felt the heat rise over my face. I kept my mouth shut, taking deep breaths through my nose. I was sure I looked angry, but I was embarrassed, again. It's Lucas, isn't it? I asked, trying to keep my emotions in check and prevent tears from spilling from my eyes. Karen nodded. Did he suggest something illegal or something predatory? I asked, shutting my eyes as if afraid to see her reaction. Karen was sitting behind her mahogany desk, a piece she had inherited from her best friend and mentor. Both, she said, showing no emotion. I counted to 10 in my head, blinking rapidly, still trying to hold back tears. Karen slowly pushed a box of tissues towards me, stretching to make sure I could easily take it. I'm sorry he did that, I said, hoping I could mirror the flatness of her expression, but sure the tears would spill down my cheeks soon. Karen nodded. Am I being fired? I asked as the thought popped into my head. Karen sighed and stood up. No, that's not something I have the authority to do. She walked around the desk, walked to the door, and opened it. This conversation was over. Even though I had plenty of questions about what would happen to me now, I knew Karen was done, and there was no place for discussion. I had never been dismissed from anyone's presence before, but everything with Karen had been formal and rigid. I walked to the door, my head hanging in shame, but at least I hadn't cried. One more thing, Karen said in a whisper as I passed her. If you do want to keep your job, you should keep your brother away in the future. Maybe even cut him out of your life. He will destroy you. I sat at my desk, too distracted to work on the new author's debut novel's marketing plan. My emotions shifted between anger, embarrassment, and anxiety. As much as I was horrified that Karen suggested I cut him out of my life, Lucas had cost me another relationship with his scheming and inappropriate behavior. At a recent corporate weekend, I had seen my brother wandering around the CEO's Westchester home, chatting with my colleagues. He had targeted the executives, most of whom looked like they were trying to get away from him. When he found Karen, who literally looked down her nose at him, I knew this could only end in disaster. Karen was not the type of woman who would tolerate Lucas's misogyny and aggressive behavior. I hoped she would shut him down, and that would be the end of it. I had no idea he had proposed something beyond sex. I picked up my office phone and called Lucas. I knew the company was currently monitoring staff phones and email, and I wanted them to know I took them seriously and would do what I needed to keep my job. "Hey, baby sis," he said, and I knew he was probably on my couch, in his underwear. "You need to be out of my apartment by the time I get home," I said, trying to channel Karen's flat voice. "What did I do?" he said in a light voice, free from real worry. "If I lose my job, I will never speak to you again." "I don't know what you proposed, but I think it's going to get me fired from another job," I told him, feeling the rage bubble up. "Relax, baby sis," was all Lucas said. I was appalled at his reaction. Years of repressed resentment were unlocked, and I slammed down my phone. These landline phones, even with internet connections, allowed the cathartic slamming of the phone. "Do you need to talk?" Rhonda, one of my colleagues, asked, holding a tissue out to me and reaching between our desks. "Karen decided she can't mentor me anymore," I said, taking the tissue and wiping the tears that were trickling from my eyes. "Let's go get lunch," Rhonda said and grabbed her purse. Rhonda had a penchant for office gossip, but I went with her. At this point, I was sure all the details were known around the office, and maybe I could learn something new from her. "What happened?" Rhonda asked when we sat down with our lunches in the cafeteria. "My brother, again," I said, poking at the lettuce in my salad. She even suggested I could be fired for whatever he said to the executives. I had been thrilled when Karen, one of the publishing company executives, offered to mentor me. She could tell I was motivated to lead the marketing team, and I had the experience. Karen told me how those she mentored went on to great things, her favorite example being Emma Shaw, who had gone on to start her own publishing company with Karen's help. I was thrilled to have someone so important take me under her wing. It hadn't been an easy 6 months, but I had learned more than I expected about the company, promoting books, and working with authors. I had moved to the East Coast to start fresh without Lucas. After years of him costing me jobs with his inappropriate behavior, I needed to try something new. It was going well until he surprised me with a visit on the same weekend as a vital work retreat. I couldn't get out of it, even if I had wanted to. Karen was going to introduce me to some of the other executives, and my boss was going to let me pitch some ideas I had to market on social media. I tried to get rid of Lucas, but he came to my office and charmed his way into an invitation. "Did he sexually harass Karen?" Rhonda asked, leaning in as if we were sharing a secret. I nodded, but I didn't know the details. Rhonda shook her head, leaning back when I didn't share more. "Terrible idea. Karen didn't suffer aggressive men. She quickly put them in their place, especially if they were younger than she was. Lucas wouldn't have hesitated to try to manipulate her sexually. He believed he was flattering her with the attention. His irritation with her, when he later argued that I should find a new job because she was trying to control and manipulate me, made sense now. She said he proposed something illegal, I added, wanting to figure out what it could have been. Rhonda's eyes got wide, and she stopped chewing before leaning in again. Whatever gossip was spreading, this was probably new information and exactly what she was hoping for. He's done this before, I said, resigning myself to being office gossip. The Northanger Company has banned him from the parks, studios, and executive offices for proposing something illegal and unethical. Holy shit, Rhonda said after swallowing. How do you offend a company that much? I didn't want to share the entire story of how he had manipulated my ex-fiancé Daniel, manipulated me into sleeping with someone he was trying to make a deal with, gotten fired from one job, and then proposed a stolen app to the company. That had been the lowest point of my life. There were lost jobs and ruined relationships after that, but Northanger had been the worst. I had personally never recovered after that. Part of me was still angry at Daniel and his sister Katie for their role in the plan falling apart. Another part of me regretted what I had done to help my brother, which cost me everything. I rarely dated, not knowing if Lucas would come in and blow up another relationship just as I was getting everything I wanted from it. He may have stolen proprietary code from one company and is offering it to us, I told her, thinking back to what he did to Northanger. It may be useless now, but it could be corporate espionage. I had no idea what I was saying, but it felt right. Lucas often got revenge for being fired by taking software to other companies. He would target those I worked for, thinking I would be a valued employee. His entitlement was so high, it was delusional. I wish I had seen that when I was dating Daniel. What are you going to do? Rhonda asked. I shrugged, worried that I would have to cut my only brother out of my life and afraid it would destroy my parents as a result. Was my career that important to me? Was another personal relationship worth it to me? I suddenly thought of the guy I had just started dating and had a moment of fear. I really liked him and feared Lucas would ruin that for me if given a chance. Once I had put Lucas before Daniel and followed my brother down a path that had ruined everything. I was sure I could make the same mistake again if I refused to enforce boundaries with Lucas. It took me days to figure it out. I focused on work, doing my best to apologize to my boss and show her how important this job was to me. She told me I was on probation. It was frustrating to suffer, again, for something Lucas did. The more I fumed about my brother's actions and how I took the hit for him, I kept coming back to Daniel and the marriage I would have if not for Lucas. Maybe Daniel and I would have struggled, the way Katie suggested back then, but I had changed since then. If it hadn't been for Lucas and Carter Thornton, I wouldn't be this much of a mess. I was sure of that. I understood, finally, that I would never have the life I wanted if Lucas was part of it. I told him the truth over a video call. You can't be part of my life anymore, I said while he rambled about some woman he had seduced and ghosted. You're crazy, Lucas said, waving his hand and rolling his eyes. He had told me this many times in my life. You're a predator who has cost me nearly everything, I said, sticking to my plan. You're my sister. You can't cut me out of your life, he said, slowing his voice and enunciating the words. I've been fired from 3, almost 4 jobs. I can't go to Northanger Parks ever again. I ruined a relationship with a man who wanted to marry me. You don't always suffer for your schemes, but I always do. These people don't really want you. They don't know you like I do, Lucas said, his voice still flat. Carter Thornton kept creeping in when I thought about Daniel. You whored me out to a man in hopes that he would go into business with you, I said, snarling to the camera. He was silent for a moment. My word choice had hit the mark. You slept with Carter because you wanted to. I didn't make you do anything, he said with a sneer. I knew the undertone. My brother had just called me a slut. It didn't upset me as much as it should. He had always felt this way about me. I wasn't going to just take it this time. You knew I would do anything for you. You whispered in my ear all night at that club. You bought me drinks. I could argue worse, I said, matching his tone and pace. We sat there, looking directly at our screens, so it didn't look like we were making direct eye contact. It was a battle of wills, and I was ready to win. I've changed my phone numbers and email addresses. Mom and Dad know not to share them with you. I don't want to speak to you again, I told him before ending the call without a goodbye. I blocked him before shutting down my computer and moving on with my life. It felt like 150 pounds had been lifted off my shoulders. Thank you for listening to a little more Modern Persuasion. If you'd like to read the audiobook, ebook, or paperback versions of the main books in the series or other related short story collections, visit my webpage for links. Like or subscribe to this YouTube channel for more audiobooks and videos.